not quite sure that there. And then is that another person?
It is another person.
Maybe need some bigger. Let's let us call to order. We'll see if August rolls in. So we'll call it to order here. All right. Oh, you're echoing. Oh, am I? You thought maybe there were two vowels.
You got us surrounded.
Okay, things better? Okay. All right. So if you have joined us via Zoom, please raise your hand to comment. Individual comments should be limited to 3 minutes. Tools, *6 to mute and unmute, *9 to raise hand, and then we'll unmute you. And I just ask for a minute taker. Anybody that's on Zoom or in the audience, just say your name for a minute taker. I appreciate it. All right, moving on. Minutes from last month. Any additions, corrections?
I move to approve.
I second.
All right. Mike, we're still looking. Is there any?
No additional comments or changes.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right, motion carries.
Aye, sorry.
Okay, thank you. I was looking at you. All right, public comment period. Anybody have any comments that are not already on the agenda? Mary?
Hi, thank you very much, Chairwoman Valerie. Mary Rapar from Home Valley. Just two things. I did want to invite you all to visit the Board Commission's website and see about the Vital Indicators Project. They call it Vital Signs Indicators. The Board Commission is in the middle of doing this project, or finally implementing this project. This is something that we worked on in 2007. We had a community advisory team, a technical advisory team, and went on for 18 months, and we came up with 51 critical indicators for the national scenic area. And one of those was actually, we were ahead of our time, climate change and other things. So this is a really vital project for the gorge. It's going to be investigating, well, they're first going to be setting some baselines for all the indicators. And then they will be gathering data to see how we're doing, plus, minus, bad, worse, you know, we're gosh awful, we're going extinct, whatever. So Lisa Nass-Cook is in charge of that program, and tomorrow is a Board Commission meeting. I kind of looked at the agenda. So, but this is a really critical program or project for the gorge, because things are changing. And one of the things that the vital indicators will work toward is how do you, what's going on? How do we build resilience and handle what the changes are coming down the pipe to all of us? Climate change is here, you know, welcome to the 21st century, but we are going to have to survive it somehow. And so hopefully these indicators are for air, water quality, for wildlife, for a multitude of things. Each one has 3 specific indicators under the topic. So there is a kind of a booklet on the Board Commission's website that you can read about this project. I think Stevenson and North Lauderdale and us and the rural centers should also start thinking about these vital indicators. And what you're seeing on the ground, you might be the citizen scientists that will be contributing to these indicators. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. We don't discuss what other entities sometimes are doing, but this project is really critical for the health of the national scenic area. And secondly, I want to invite you all, as you know, I'm the Grange Master. So come, we have a movie scheduled, well, movie discussion scheduled for July 27th. And the community resiliency program, we have a yearly program set up for Big Range. And our film series, Critical Issues of Our Times, this year is community connections is a theme, and sustainability is the underlying theme. So the movie for this month, which is free, you just go and pre-register on the library events website, Stevenson Library, and it's Gardening Back to Eden. Last month's film was Living Soil, and I really urge everyone to see that film. It is a really good film. It's free on YouTube, and none of these things cost. And you see the film at your leisure, and then you can join the discussion on the 27th at 7 p.m.
Great, thank you, Mary,
or
appreciate it.
6:30.
Okay, well, everybody can go on the website though and find it though too, right? Okay, thank you, appreciate it. Anyone else have any other comments that are not on the agenda? I'm sure I missed people last time. I think we're good. Okay, Ben, we'll just roll through to short plat, and I see you have optional review.
Mhm. So as with all short plats, they are to be sent to the planning commission to review and provide comments if you all desire. This is a 2-lot short plat that characterizes it as infill in the residential core of town. The lot is developed with one house, and then there'd be a vacant plot of land for sale. As with most of these, just recommend that you bypass your review. But certainly if you want to discuss it more, we can schedule a time to go back deeper into the details.
Fine. Jeff, Davey, what do you?
I just assume it's gonna meet all your basic zoning requirements in terms of lot size.
If it doesn't get approved.
That's right, yeah, so I really don't think that, I see a need for us to look at this. It looks pretty straightforward.
That does it too. I'm still trying to figure out where it is. I mean, I'm used to deliver mail over at Willard, but I can't decide if is it closer to the high school or
Upper Willard.
Upper Willard? Okay. Yeah, everything looked 5 by 5 as far as I can tell.
Mike?
I would certainly defer in this, for staff to do administrative review of the short plan. But I do have one question about this short plan in particular. Before I would defer to administrative review, in this proposed lot demarcation creating a lot, it looks like an existing shed would be placed on one of the vacant lots. And to me, that seems like that's an accessory building without a physical roof. And so just pointing it out.
It is noted. It'll need to be moved to.
Oh, okay, all right. Otherwise, I certainly defer the staff review.
And I have a question too, though. I actually got a little confused because I was looking for maybe 4 houses. Every time I think of a short plat, I always think, no, but it's 4 or less, but I don't know. Are we, would this site accommodate more than?
It's
2?
single family zone, so
Okay.
they could have a home and accessory dwelling unit,
Okay.
one dwelling unit and accessory dwelling unit.
Right.
But the zoning right now only permits that, no multifamily uses beyond that.
Okay, all right. All right, well, I think we'll just move on and do that. All right, old business, subcommittee report, public involvement. I almost did like, always we're gonna miss somebody, because I think I missed people the last time and I couldn't see people's hands raised.
I'm usually the only one up there.
I have just documents that I'll explain what's there, and then have Jeff or Mike or Pat or Tracy take over from there. So you've got the cover reports and who's involved in that subcommittee, and then attached to that are 3 documents that came as recommendations from that. All of them are more or less frameworks for you to massage and to use each time you begin addressing an issue. So,
Thanks, Ben. Hey, you know, this little work group has been together 3 times now. And I really want to commend all those folks that have taken the time to sit on this work group. Phil Crawford's not here tonight. He wrote me and said he was detained in Portland, and Tracy Brothers here, and Brian McNamara, and Rick and Julie May, and Pat Rice, and Ben, and Mike sat in as a fellow planning commission member on this process. And it was interesting because there was truly, I think, a wide range of perspectives and views that came to the table. But I think at the same time, there was a commitment to try and find a path forward within which we could have great public engagement in trying to make some decisions for the future of the city. It's not that I'm sure we probably all agree what that zoning conclusion might look like at the end. But I think we're all very committed to having a public engagement process that will work. And to that end, what we have tonight, and Tracy will go through it in some details, and Pat as well, is that sort of first step. It's a framework. It sort of says, here's what we think any public engagement process ought to have. Here are the key elements. Here are the key considerations. In some cases, it's sort of a menu of things you ought to be thinking about. And we hope that as you look at that tonight and as we discuss that, you feel comfortable with that, and that you'll be comfortable with us moving on to phase two, which is basically taking this framework in and saying, how would we use that to approach the zoning review, the residential zoning review that we have on the table. So this is sort of the first increment, I would say. That first sort of checkpoint, I think, back with you all to say, are we on track in terms of laying out what a good public engagement process should look like? Mike, I don't know what you want to throw in here up front before we turn it over to Tracy.
No, I just want to give a good thanks to the members of the public that helped craft this policy. What on the them will do without their input. So thank you for that. And I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I know Tracy, you and Pat were sort of agreed or railroaded into talking to us here tonight. So
okay, I'll go ahead and get us started, and then Pat will give a nice summary and make sure to share whatever I left out. What I would like to do is, what paperwork do you have in front of you? I didn't actually print out the packet. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with what looks like the PowerPoint. While we're getting oriented to that, as Jeff alluded to, there's quite a bit of creative tension in the room. You know, some of us we thought we had two jobs, and one was to create a general public engagement framework in which you all could use in an enduring fashion, ideally even going to city council. And then the second one was applying that to the zoning conversation. And some of us also wanted to just get into that zoning conversation. And so what you see before us is a lot of patience that people had to exhibit as we were all trying to run in different directions. And I'm hoping just at the kicking off of further discussion and dialogue, but I think now that we've got the framework, we can quickly move into the applying it to the zoning conversation. I'm not saying it will be easy based on the conversations we've had, but so our goal was to, I'm hoping our goal tonight is to adopt the proposal, edit as needed along the way. And then, like I said, move into that pilot stage. I also want to give context that, you know, we came asking for sort of a slowing down and really did understand that there were public engagement efforts. So this does not presuppose that the efforts were not made. This was, how do we bolster it knowing how important this is? Because I think it spurred much bigger beyond the zoning conversations. And so are we looking at broader growth concerns in the organization? In Stevenson. So Care Oregon is listed on this little thing at the bottom. I just took this template and I just figure out how to get that off there. So ignore that. But that's why it's okay. The other piece I would say up front is this is something that needs to be right-sized along the way. So what we're giving you is what we think is sort of an expansive framework in which the threshold of the issue at hand, the decision impact, et cetera, would be considered as you are looking at these methods and end user services. So the PowerPoint actually should be renamed public involvement decision. So we're using public involvement as the broader umbrella, and I will clean that up. Public engagement is a particular task methodology of getting people having conversations and sharing information. I'll get to that in a minute. Anyhow, so we just sort of thought, well, essentially this is the workflow. There's an issue, an opportunity, a request that comes to the commission. Staff looks at it, responds to it, does that early preliminary work, and then it comes here. Then there's a discussion and decision around, do we need public engagement or public involvement? Again, we sort of did a name terminology change here at the end, so we'll get that cleaned up. But is it political? Is it impact? You all know what would probably rise to that level early on, and if not, you might invite people to weigh in on it. So it doesn't have to be made only with you. You could also solicit input on that early of a stage. But then you move into the determining the approach and the plan. And so again, assessing the need based on the issue or impact, determining budget and capacity of staff. I do not want to underestimate the emphasis on that one, because I think that is going to be what we are grappling with moving forward. It takes a lot of work and effort and resource to implement some of these strategies. And then identifying the stakeholders, utilizing the framework that we'll look at in a moment. And then move into that pre-implementation phase where we're really doing all of that gathering of information, getting that decision clearly articulated, working on the language to make it clearer to present it, moving into the public space. And then I identified sort of activate networks as needed, again, trying to emphasize how do we use our social business networks to come into this space and help with the public involvement as well. So we'll go into more detail here, but I just want to kind of say this is sort of how we thought the flow would go. And then the public involvement framework below, we're going to go into a lot more specificity here, so I'm not even going to read much through it, but starting with informing, educating, and outreaching, moving into that engagement space, making room for the reality that things would get refined. So you would be validating assumptions or invalidating them. You would refine the problem or the solution. You might solicit new solutions and then go back to the drawing board, et cetera. But there is that real recognition that refining things that are brought into the public is anticipated in both the public and the commission. Should be aware of that. And then moving into that decision space. So just taking the input that you got and making sure that there is communication back out so that feedback loop to the community. Anything surprising there or that we need to talk in? Okay, all right.
It's easy to understand. I like this.
Okay, good.
I like it.
Nice visual overflow. So what next is in front of us then is the Planning Commission Public Involvement Task Force. So the narrative that has the larger boxes. Okay, let's look at that. So again, where we have surfaced, I think, the most conversation, possible confusion, need for technical expertise, et cetera, is around this issue definition. It's that early upfront characterization, context setting, language access, those elements. As I sort of opened my public comment in the very beginning, I do not envy you all the task of explaining zoning to people, but I do believe it is y'all's task, right? And so that's where we were like, well, we might be here to help, and we can still partner with some of those things. But again, so defining the issue, this just gets us into a little bit more detail. As you can see, sort of that first one, defining the issue, is what's the context? Where did this information, where did the request come from? Who's identifying the problem? Could you all derive a lot of your direction from the comprehensive plan? I think you also get developers and individuals asking for input. Staff could identify areas of need, and obviously the council, which is something that we anticipate. I'll let you finish reading the bullets on that one. And again, moving into the issue opportunity definition process. And that's where we were sort of saying, like, let's flush this out. Let's get as much information forward. But we also need to know, is the problem accepted as valid if it is brought to you all? Can the city do anything about it? Is it a city responsibility, and does the city have capacity? So that's an upfront understanding, both to give the public a better understanding of whether or not it can. For me, that is a great public education, because I would not know how to independently answer this question if I thought it was an issue forward. So how do we make more transparent your thinking and processing? And this might be some ways to do that. And then again, proposing the solutions. Trying to understand, is this going to be the planning commission only? Do we invite others into doing this? Are we open to having more than one solution, et cetera? So these are sort of prompts for just moving down that workflow, if you will. And then selecting the involvement strategy, and again, more detail there. But again, restating, assessing capacity needed for engagement. And again, I think outside of the box. Think about how you can activate your network. But as we, as your constituents, I think can be of service to that as well. Any questions, or I would actually, because this was such a detailed topic, I would invite any input from my committee partners before I jump into the education.
Or anyone in the room.
Or anyone, sure,
Anybody
fair
has
enough,
any?
yeah, I just meant if I missed a statement.
Oh, yeah, I was just saying,
Yeah.
we're pretty open here. We're all
Yeah,
neighbors.
gotcha,
So
okay.
anybody that has any input at
Yeah.
this point. Okay, I think we're good.
Okay, all right. Moving quickly right along. So then again, getting into the inform, educate, outreach. So we kept getting a little bit, the term that Phil always laughs when I use is wrapped around the axle, because outreach and engagement are really close cousins, right? And so you do outreach is unidirectional information sharing. So that is how we have defined differently outreach from engagement. It's one direction. We're pushing information out. The engagement is that bi-directional. We're pushing information out. We are receiving it in. We are having conversations. We are soliciting input. So we actually did some work in each of those areas, splitting those apart. We wanted to be really clear that that very initial step of the education, it's not just about sending information out, but trying to get it as accessible, understandable, timely as possible, with this notion that we need to be compelling. So if we want people to participate, we need to let the folks understand what might happen if they don't. And so it's like the hook, right? And so this is where, again, we were talking a lot about, it's a skill set that a lot of people have to hire for to create materials that fall into all of these categories, right? It is not easy to take complex information and complex problems and make them simple. I will let you continue to read those other bits. Making information available, having it this sort of simple, but then the deeper dive. And then again, through that you might see it, the surfacing of other people who actually get bite the hook. Then you have methods. I'm just going to let you all sort of read through this again, menu of services. I won't go into a lot of explanation there, so maybe just take a moment. See if there's anything missing or is unclear.
It's not the intent here that you would use all of these, but you would select the one that's most appropriate for the issue that you're dealing with.
Right, based on your stakeholder or your target audience or the issue.
I know you've done surveying with you in the past, and that's been really, always been interesting, get information back that I wasn't expecting, always. So, no, this is great.
And if it's not up top, I think we may have considered that a bi-directional because it's not just one way, right? And so we might see that on this next handout.
Okay.
What you will see
Oh, I see it over here.
is the engagement. And so this again, menu of services. So this is that bi-directional information exchange between public and city staff and elected officials. What we were talking about here is, one of the principles is that, or elements is that it should be multifaceted. So not one thing may not get what we need.
Right, 'cause some people don't read the newspaper, you know, there's some folks that
There,
don't,
exactly.
right? So it's how you
Exactly.
pick a couple of things to reach as many people as possible.
Mhm. So this next document is sort of a range of examples of simple to more complex. What we tried to do was, sort of subjectively assess what the possible impact would be next to the method. Resources needed, again, that's a guess, but we would get objective the moment that some of these were chosen. And then the notes is just further discussion and description. Public workshops, no surprise. Y'all have done those, Survey Monkey, done them. So I'm not gonna know what you all have done, so I know the two of those you have. The rest of these I might be taking a guess. The meet and greets with staff or elected officials, but coffees, that kind of thing. That's it. Number 4 says city and commissioner meetings. That's intended to be city council and commissioner meetings. With focus methods for input and dialogue. You all, I think, do a stellar job for a government body being accessible. It is more of an information exchange in the back and forth. You all respond to and listen to and digest what we've said so far. I think the city council meetings have a little less of that tone and tenor, so I think, they too are our audience for all of this. But again, sort of building upon and or continuing the good work that you've done. Town hall, where there's even maybe debates of topics, so we actually hear both sides. So there was conversation about, we don't always want to present one side, because then you kind of get into a gotcha role if somebody has a different opinion. Storyboards, where we could either share data or collect it. Putting it up at the library, or the grocery store, or what have you, where you pose a question or sticky dots or whatever, but it's just, again, bi-directional. Listening sessions, where it's a little less meet and greet, but a kind of a more comprehensive agenda. Attending existing meetings, we have a lot of cool groups that get together in our community. How do we tap those existing? So we don't necessarily invite people in, we go to them, or we collectively, you all go to them. Large employer meetings, again, as applicable, but if you've got a lot of folks asking for particular labor level of housing, that is not quite right, but sort of affordable housing for a large employer or group of employers, maybe going and having conversations there. Again, the Pioneer article, why we put that in both was because we figured people could Q&A, so people could submit a question and then it would be answered in the paper. So we're going to go through it. Task force, interest groups, focus groups. I have to say the zoning might be a great example of a work group next step. The subcommittee network group next step, that's where you gather expertise, but it would be bound and time sensitive, all of those things, just like the other things, but knowing that not everything needs to go out to the broader public, recognizing that. Pizza parties, that was just something that we got excited about, and Pat was great to demonstrate that at our last meeting. Postcard soliciting input. Again, a laundry list, which this should be a living, breathing document that you all get to add to, etc. But what we also left was a yes or no. So this could be something that you say, yes, we're going to do these 3 things. Then this could live with your public document on your public subcommittee website or what have you, and then people know, what are you doing? If you refine it, you come back and you update it. So that could be living, breathing in a tool. Whew. I'm going as fast as I can. Okay.
You're doing great. Thank you. You're doing great.
Okay, good. Again, because these are the 2 key parts. Anything else, any input or additional questions on the engagement strategies?
No, I just want to add though that I like the fact that it's a living document, because I know we'll go through a process and a couple of years have gone by and I think we had a town hall, but then I can't, you know what I mean? I don't remember. And then you can just refer back to the document. You can quickly see what the engagement level that you had.
I think part of our thought too was as you go through, you start to do some of these public involvement and engagement events, people are gonna tell you how you can better
Yeah.
get a hold of them or work with
Right.
them or get the information, or solicit their input. So, you know, these were our thoughts, but there's probably other thoughts out there too that we can wrap into this over time. So it is, yeah, we'll learn,
Yeah.
I think, as we go ahead.
Ben, you can make a comment?
Well, one of the issues that Tracy identified too is that when she got the information about the zoning and then started digging into it, she didn't know what sort of engagement efforts had been made. And so
Right.
presenting it in these visual ways and making sure that there's some track back and pointing to whether that's on the website or as part of that informed and engaged stage, having this there, being able to see, oh, they're doing this. I forget how you put it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that it offers transparency that folks sort of like, you know, y'all are doing the work, right? And if it doesn't seem sufficient, there might be input offered. If it does, I would know, I'm gonna go to the town hall, but I'm probably not gonna do the survey messy because of some of my cognitive challenges that I have on screen. So it's also allowing people to know how and when to engage, but it also is saying like, we're doing good work here. Look at everyone. This is how we're doing. So it's also, you know, promotion, but not in a picky way, I guess.
But it was, I think she hit the nail on the head. It really, the theme that kept coming back up as we were doing this was transparency. Allow people to see what those steps are that we're taking. We're doing the public's interest in the sunshine, so to speak.
Right. Rick, did you have a comment?
Yeah, on the engagement part, you know, I really kind of like the idea of the subcommittee
I do too.
on it. Basically, you know, having it open, looking at all reasonable ways to solve a problem, you know, after you've defined the problem carefully, so you know whatever the problem is and the opportunity, that seems to be a logical place to go. And there are pitfalls if you bring it to the public, I think, without going through a subcommittee when you have something similar to like the zoning, the proposed zoning change, because, you know, that issue you're dealing with, you're not just dealing with zoning, you're dealing with affordable housing, density, quality of living, flexibility, development pitfalls, ADAs, setbacks. I mean, there's just this, you know, it's not just one issue. It ends up being this large group of issues. I think if we put that in front of the public and go, here's all the issues, go ahead and go with, I think we'll lose a lot of them. So kind of boiling it down to its essentials through a subcommittee process when you have something that's really as intricate as zoning, I think is an excellent.
So your idea would be to start with a subcommittee on a complex issue, and then what would the subcommittee then be?
Make recommendations to the planning department, go, okay, you know, we've broken it down, and this is, you know, for instance, something like Tracy did, where this is the tree of what we're trying to accomplish. And I really don't know because it's going to vary from one issue to another. But let's say with the zoning issue, we kind of say, I think it's we kind of come to a conclusion that it's a real good idea to go ahead and change a certain section to allow more high density. We also think it's a good idea to do this, that, and the other thing too. In other words, a multi-faceted approach coming in to try to solve the problem instead of just trying to have one magic bullet. So that may be a way to go on something like this, because there are opportunities here besides just one major giant zoning change. There's an opportunity to take a look at a lot of things. And I think the subcommittee would be the first place to start, because that would be a place where you could break it down and use this.
And I think we had our own subcommittee as a report to the board. I mean, I don't know if you can consider it a subcommittee, but Jeff was good about starting off with, here's our scope. And so I think that's it. So when you say, what would the subcommittee do? I think you all would help decide that, right? It's sort of like, this is what's in, this is what's out. But some of it could be the public engagement, some of it could be the detailed elements. Any other things before we move into refine and jumping into time?
I would say that I'd try to keep as much in as possible. I mean, keep the door open to all the possibilities, and then, you know, if you get an interim and discuss them, obviously you'll put them sent out.
Right. An element of it would be start broad in there, and how to do the job it would be in there. Okay.
No, that's great.
So refine, again, I won't read all of that. two, but again, it's the iterations of both the problem statement, and or possible solutions. We sort of put goals that maybe they're principles. I mean, I guess those are stated as goals, but it's recognizing that there are people out there that are creative and have technical expertise in certain areas that could be drawn upon, and they will not be decision makers in the room, but they would be contributors to better understanding and ideally solving some of the things that are in front of us as a community. Check-in, that is where all of the input is collected and brought back to you all, and that's where you all are back engaged again. This is what we heard, this is what we should do with the information, et cetera, et cetera. And you would either make a decision or move back into the refinement process. So think of it, this is not linear, and it would go back and forth. Then again, you would move into the decision space, is documenting it clearly and then communicating it broadly, specifically with those that were engaged, if not more so. There's an example of a zoning communication just on the bottom. I won't get into that, but it's Pat gave an example of that sort of book we were talking about. So kind of a creative way and starting general to get people interested. What seems to be embedded in here that you might benefit from pulling to the forefront was we had started discussion at one point around what are sort of principles that we would want to see in a public involvement framework. And I think there was a lot of discussion and they're represented in here, but there may, I don't know, I'm doing this on the fly, I did not talk to my fellow committee members, but we might push a couple more things across the table that are just sort of an overarching, kind of set of principles above this or about this. But mostly it's just a sort of saying that we believe, our community is experiencing growth and change on a lot of fronts, right? I mean, not just beyond the planning commission. And so a little bit of we have heard the call and we are acting. I mean, a bit of I don't know. I mean, this is exciting if you all are going to adopt this tonight, and we'd like to see it spread a little farther. But that there are a lot of things facing us as a community, and this is one of the ways that we're going to be responsive to those things. So I want to thank you all for your great invitation to get us around a table, and my fellow committee members for being patient with some of my hard driving style of approach. But would love to see this adopted and then quickly move into the zoning conversation. But again, it's yours to edit and make your own.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks for everybody for working on it.
Yeah. Pat,
Yeah.
Any other comments? Yeah.
Well, I'll just make some general comments. I just made a few notes. I think, and this is some of what we discussed in the group, but one of the things we talked about was the why you're making a decision, why you're doing something. And when we had a little tension in the group about the zoning issue and the why, I was kind of I joked that it was really serious, and sometimes then I just joke. I'm not serious, but here I was both. And I said, well, if we can't answer the why internally ourselves, or staff can't, or you folks can't, we don't have to worry about the zoning. We can relax because it's never going to go to the public because we haven't even answered the why ourselves. So don't stress about the zoning because it'll never come up. Because everybody agreed that we have to be able to say why we're advancing something. So I just thought, well, we're off the hook then in terms of those that don't think there should be any change. Because the why we'll have to answer before we go to the public. One of the things that we went through this, what I realized is it's kind of like if you have a discussion with your wife or your spouse, and you ever realize that at the end you realize you're in agreement, but you have this long debate with each other, and pretty soon you go, wait, we agree, what's going on here? And then you're kind of mad at each other for having that 20-minute argument and you were in agreement. And so that's why sometimes I think with public outreach, it really gets down to your intentions. And in other words, it's like artwork. You'll know it when you see it, or obscenity. And that famous court case, well, you know it when you see it. You'll know you have good public engagement You just know it, you feel it, you'll know people interacted with you. So we can spell it out, but it's kind of like diagramming, and it's a good thing to do, but it's kind of like diagramming the debate with your wife when you realize you disagreed. So in other words, you can take the most well thought out plan, and if you don't have good intentions, and you're gonna mess it up anyway. So it's kind of like, do you want to reach 90% of the population on something? And then you will take that as a framework and you'll try to do it. And as you go through, you'll think, we're not connecting with people. We're not getting the response we want. Well, that means that's not working. You try something else. And the reason that I think we all feel strongly about this is, as I've been out there talking to people, door to door, I realize that people do care about these issues. And they know more than you realize. For example, I met somebody, and the talent out there, one of the things I realized is the talent out there by doing solid outreach is pretty impressive. And in fact, you know how many people I come across to where I met them, and we all know I'm running for a particular office, where I meet them, I think, how come you're not running? Because I shouldn't be, and you should be, for example. So you have talent like in zoning out there. For example, the Kent State instructor that worked there 40 years that just retired and is living and just built a new house over here and studied business and statistics. Or Charlie Hales, who lives here. Or the firefighter from Orange County that came and had a $20 million budget he ran where he gave fire services to all these different entities. And he actually had to send reps to about 20 city councils. So I met that gentleman last night. So that talent is out there on any subject. So by doing outreach, but you run a risk, is because you're going to find when you do that, that you're going to run across people that know more than you on any subject. And you're going to realize, wait a minute, they should be making this decision, not me. Now that doesn't mean you give up your authority, but it means you have to be humility, and you have to realize that you have to think, there are people out there smarter than I am, and I need to reach them. And also there are people out there that don't know near as much as I do, and I have to educate them. And so it's, one has to really like people to do proper engagement. And so those are just some of the comments. So we could do this. I'm just trying to say is there's no panacea here. You gotta truly want in your gut to reach people. And the other thing is, one of the things I learned is no matter how complex these subjects are or how meat and potatoes they are, in the end, and I'm not going to talk very long, so I'm almost done. I'll try to do that. In the end, it always involves an emotion. For example, zoning. You know what I've been hearing on zoning? Basically, the bottom line is, if you said to the person, are you worried that you worked 40 years to retire and finally you can sit on your porch in your dream house and have a glass of wine and read a book? Are you worried you're going to be staring at an apartment complex? Probably 70% of the people I've talked to go, yeah, that's what I'm worried about. In other words, they're worried about the quality of life. If you say, well, quality of life, we just need to do the nuts and bolts and setbacks, look at all these meat and potatoes here. Quality of life is an emotional term, and it's going to mean different things to different people. So that's why the discussion and the debate needs to happen. For example, I know that if I ask 10 people, and you all would agree with it, what affordable housing means, we're going to get 10 different answers, but yet we're acting half the time as if when we say, do you want affordable housing, that, well, the other people think that that's what I think it is. Well, they don't, trust me, because their thoughts are different. So we have to define the terms. What you have to almost say, what does affordable housing mean to you? Because that's what we're talking about. And you're going to find out that maybe you were arguing like I do with my wife sometimes when we were in agreement, or we thought we were in agreement and we weren't in agreement. So defining the terms. Another thing we talked about in the group is trust. What's weird is that people trust you on one issue, or maybe on a more complex issue. They'll say, hey, I don't care, I trust you. Go ahead and decide. I don't even want to be involved. So what's weird is how all the issues, if you do this well on some other issue, on some unrelated issue, you can piggyback off the trust you gain. Because pretty soon people will go, I trust that person. I don't need to be involved in that. They're not going to mess my view up. I'm not gonna wake up one day with a bulldozer out my door because, and they would have told me if that was gonna happen because I trust them. So these are just, and I'm almost, then, oh, and the other thing is the public involvement. What I've been learning recently is the public involvement actually ups everybody's game. Because guess what? If you have to answer questions, you gotta know it. Because it's pretty embarrassing if you say, hey, I'm on the planning commission, and they ask you a question and you don't know the answer. So by the fact that you're talking to them, it forces you to know more. Well, when you know more, you'll make better decisions. So, but then you can educate. So it's a feedback loop to where just by dealing with other people on an issue, even though it's painful sometimes, you just want to make the decisions perhaps that are less messy, you end up knowing more. Because you had to get smarter to go talk to all these people. So that's, I think, public engagement. Even if you were talking to empty chairs and you thought there were people in there, and those empty chairs never answered back, but you thought there were people there, you're going to end up making better decisions. And the reason I know that for certain is because that's happened to me just, in the last month, where I thought I better do my homework on that. Or I'll get a question and I don't know, and I have to go back and find out. And then I think I'm about done with my comments. So have fun with all this because it's, anyway.
It's a process. Thanks, Pat. Go ahead.
I'll do one quick one
Yeah.
here. We've all talked about the importance of defining the problem. What is the problem in enough detail to understand exactly what we're up against. One of the things that also came, I'm just going to bounce around a little bit, is that as we go into the engagement process, and let's say we have subcommittees involved in it, the importance of bringing city council members into that process as soon as possible. The fact is, there's been a commitment to this particular group is that if we become involved in any of the subcommittees, that's the first thing we're going to do. Is we are going to basically find the city council member that has an interest in that and bring them into the process for a couple of reasons. Is first, have another voice. And the second reason is to have somebody that can explain it to the rest of the city council and the mayor, so that when the work is done, that the whatever happens is passed and in a relatively easy way and is understandable. As far as the engagement process goes, as far as the subcommittee go, I was trying to think of, well, what would I want in a subcommittee and what would I want to be coming into a subcommittee? And basically open to looking at all reasonable ways to solve the problem and not tied to certain results. So what we're asking is basically coming in with a very open mind and going, okay, this is an idea we have. Let's say with Sony, we have an idea here that we think will solve this particular problem over there. Dig into how well that solves that particular problem, and then look at all the other options that are available on that. And I think that's what I'm going back to time and time again is that what we need is really to have fresh eyes taking a look at that. And part of it is what Pat's saying, we have a lot of expertise out in the community. We try to pull some of that expertise in and hopefully make the job a little bit easier for you folks and for Ben. By do some of the heavy lifting of trying to do some of the analysis. Well, what if this is an idea? Well, what is the effect of the idea? Have there been any studies on it? Anybody done that in the past? Can you bring us some data to be able to support that that's a good idea? With the subcommittee, you can break that apart, and then members can go out and do some of that legwork.
I'd like to add one point that very true in my mind, and then I realized there's no on my note. And that is when if you have subcommittees and subgroups, which is a good idea, what I would really recommend is that you, on those, that you treat those as if they were public meetings, city council meetings. In other words, give public notice, have it on Zoom and stuff. Because what I've learned is, it's amazing how many people are watching that you never knew because of COVID. One of the good things we got about that is all the technology. And it's just amazing how many minutia decisions, for example, the city council made, that somebody that you've never seen at a meeting and stuff, will know those details and will watch that and say, and for good and for bad. And so the people, I was just amazed at how attentive people really were being to the things. If you make it, then you're not operating, I'm just saying, if you treat those, one of the things I constantly heard was, and this is probably inherent, and we discussed this in our group, was the public notice period, how much time there is. And so an example I gave is on how much notice I thought there should be is pretend like you want to tell, you know you're going to have a subject, you know it's controversial, you know it in advance, but people are going to hate it. And you're going to have a lot of dialogue to communicate. How much time would they need to organize the community to fight that plan? Well, if you're honest, you'd say, okay, they need 2 weeks. Well, let's give them 2 weeks notice. And because what that does is, first of all, if you know it's going to be controversial, of course you up your game and you're being genuine, you're being transparent, you're being open and honest. So if the community needs 2 weeks to react and go talk to all their neighbors about something you're going to do that they don't like, but the point is, if you're really educated, you're going to change the minds, and it's going to be a feedback loop. If they need 2 weeks, and you just got your packet 2 days before, well, how does that work? Should you have the same notice that the community would need to fight it? So this whole process. One of the things, if we really implemented all of our various rhetoric here, probably would be operating differently in the future. It would be healthy for our city, because then that would get the brains out there that we have that are a lot smarter than I am. And maybe they aren't smarter than you, but they're smarter than I am, to get them involved. And it's their city.
Thanks, Pat. I have to tell you, the one thing you said that struck a chord with me was you said it, having this public involvement process can be messy, right? Having a lot of opinions come in. I would actually say making uninformed decisions are very messy. That's much more messy than having a public involvement process. So I really appreciate your comments. Does anyone have any, was someone have their hand up?
Yeah, so the minute taker, I'm sure is asking who was speaking.
Oh, sorry.
The female voice was Tracy Grotto. Pat Rice was the second voice we heard, and then Rick May was the third voice, followed by Pat again.
That's my fault. Sorry. You guys, could you speak again? Just say your first name first, okay?
Oh, you want me to say everything over again?
Yeah, we're good. Thanks, Pat.
Yeah, that's my piece.
So Ben, were you,
Ray
We were-
and Johanna, if that didn't cover it.
okay, so, were you expecting to make a decision on this tonight, or was just more just presentation and an opportunity to look at the framework?
Well, our hope is that you feel comfortable with this framework. And that you would feel comfortable with us proceeding to now to adapt that, to apply it to the zoning question, which we know will be a challenge, quite frankly. I think we touched on a number of those things. And I think the key thing was, why are we doing this zoning review? And I think one of the things that came up in the course of our conversation is zoning oftentimes is not the answer, the sole answer to the problems that we're holding out there. Zoning is not the sole answer to affordable housing. It's part of that answer. And it goes back to, I think, engaging the city council in this. We had a number of conversations when we start talking about zoning. Well, what does that mean for infrastructure, for roads, and water and sewer? I mean, how do we, if we're making a zoning decision, how do we start to think about that? And those are the comments, that we're getting back from some of from the public out there. How do these things fit together? We don't do a lot of the infrastructure planning. We have staff and city council, and yet they really are integral elements to making zoning more efficient. So how we define this next element as we step in terms of why are we doing this? The zoning review, zoning just seems too narrow a scope, I guess, to simply say it's just zoning without looking at those other factors that really are essential to making zoning work and achieving some of the things we're set out to do. And so we're just looking to say, go ahead. undertake to find the problem issue and see if we can move this.
Right? So, I mean, we don't need a motion, I don't think, for this. It's just more just general discussion.
Don't need a motion, but I want you guys to chat about it and feedback into it too, and really determine next steps and where to go.
Okay.
One of two outcomes that I think that you can get to tonight and some future direction. The two outcomes I think you can get to is for the visual one, that's the flow chart, which we talked about as a non-linear flow chart, or two flows there. Is that something that we can build in and is appropriate to use as a communication tool for populating with the different issues or decisions that are made throughout each public involvement process that you undertake? And then the second one is for the living document of engagement or involvement methods. I guess these are all engagement methods. One of the ways I can see using that is having that as the first attachment to any staff report when we kick off on an issue and letting you go through and do the yes, no. So I'm hoping you can focus on kind of those two things at the broad level.
Okay.
And then at the zoning specific level, if you're into it, talk about what we have done, what we still need to do for that zoning issue. Okay. The question I had during the presentation from Tracy, you talked several times about assessing capacity. And I'm wondering, kind of to help us kick off with that, what does it mean if we don't have capacity to do something on here? Is it full stop? Is it do other methods? How do you, what's the?
I mean, I think it's sort of like every project, right? You assess the time it's going to take, the resources it's going to take, and the quality, just from a project management, right? And so I think doing that assessment, and if there's a pretty significant, I don't know if this answers your question, but I think if there's a gap between the resource available to implement a meaningful process, you will do more damage than good. And so I think it's either you figure out how to get that resource, or you have some tough conversations and explain to the public why you can't have what might be seen as necessary steps to support it. As I said, so having supported a board in the past in doing this, I would always try to activate my board members. You know, what really do that? What can you do? Da, 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 da. So I think it's also just about getting really creative. You know, a lot falls on, Ben's job is not public outreach coordinator. It's not communications coordinator, or right? I mean, there's just so many elements here. So I think that is a real struggle. But I also, yeah, I'll leave it at that. I think it's also activating some of the social networks to help get some of the heavy lift. Did I answer your question? I'm sorry, that was Tracy Corrado.
Mike?
So in addressing that, Ben, I think one of the things that we could perhaps develop as the planning commission would be having a baseline engagement strategy. And I see public workshops here listed number one, high impact, high cost. But in reality, we have public workshops here during the planning commission often. We'll convene a public workshop, we'll convene a public hearing. So if we didn't have the capacity to do a very elaborate, multifaceted form of public engagement, we should perhaps settle in on some kind of baseline engagement strategy that maybe we already have informally prepared. But you know, thinking of having public workshops and having public hearings, those are things that can be done that don't have a high cost, that don't have a high impact on staff time or resources. So maybe there are some that we could identify as just the baseline of this. Maybe not tonight, but moving forward.
I had a similar take on that, in that it seemed like it would be useful to prioritize some of these things, because some of these things, you know, take a little bit longer to sink in and take effect. So I don't know if that was where you were going with that, or baseline hierarchy.
Oh, yeah, I think both strategies.
Okay.
And I wouldn't stress it. I think too that this really depends on the issue at hand. In other words, when you're looking at an issue, you need to think through what type of public engagement do you want, because it's going to vary, and the level of effort that's required is going to vary. But you ought to be thinking about that up front, rather than embarking on something and falling short or not being able to follow through or not looking for some alternative approach. So it's really key, I think, up front when we're making that decision to say, do we have the capacity to be able to do that? And if we don't, what are the options that we have? I think Mike has touched on those. You know, we heard that, you know, there may be community resources that we can draw on that can help us do that. But again, I think it's being honest and upfront when we take these things on in a good faith way, that we're really thinking about our capacity to be able to follow through.
And I think one valuable role that a subcommittee we would appoint could play or could act on in any future public engagement effort would be some of that public outreach, some of the more, some of the citizen engagement that the public is looking for. But I would think that that could be a responsibility or role that the subcommittee could play. If we brought in members of the public, we say, well, now the onus is on the subcommittee, the members of the public, to, can you identify any neighborhood groups that would want to provide input? Can you, what roles would the subcommittee have to do some of that public outreach? In addition to defining the problem or working on the clarification of the problem, would be having the subcommittee do some of that tendrils out into the community. I think that would be an important role for the subcommittee to handle or to help with as well.
Yeah, I think a subcommittee could easily fill in on any of these tasks in terms of, you know, not just defining the problem, but, you know, also looking at that inform and educate and outreach and engage. You know, I think there's just a lot of information that we can glean, you know, either through selected volunteers that sort of show up and offer an opinion, or a work group, sort of tapping into those resources and using them, rather than having them come back to you at the end and say, well, why didn't you think about this? Which you can, I guess, never totally avoid, but you certainly want to be able to be open for that input.
Well, I mean, I've been trying to figure out where in the workflow plan you would, you know, a subcommittee would come in, but I guess it could be multiple places. It's not necessarily, it depends. Like, would you typically have a subcommittee working on defining a problem? I don't know if you would have gone through that process
That's certainly
first.
the request here,
Okay.
is to have a subcommittee defining the problem. That problem definition is something that we did spend a lot of time on, as noted, that the whiteboard behind Tracy, I'm not going to go into any detail on, but that's kind of a blown up version of how we define any particular component of a problem. So what is it? Does the city have the agency, have the ability to solve that problem? Do we have a responsibility to solve that problem?
Right.
Down to determining stakeholders, who's identifying the problem, who benefits from a solution, who benefits from the problem itself, and who is harmed by the problem, who's harmed by a solution. How are solutions to the problem proposed? And so you're hearing a lot of that request to be involved in that phase, but we were hearing it in the subcommittee. So I don't know what you all want to do. It is hard overlaying what we've done with where we go from here, but I think that we've demonstrated a willingness to refine the approach and check in. So
Yeah, I don't think we're advocating, and I think we think a work group would be very useful in the zoning question, but certainly not a work group from every issue. Let's take the issue of this short plat that we had today. We could look at this same matrix and we could say, oh, no, we don't need a work group. This is pretty straightforward. Here's the issue. We don't see that there's a need for any public outreach or engagement for these reasons. Boom. You know, you move through it. So again, I think it's how you answer those questions for whatever issue that comes before us. You know, much like you do, Valerie, when we're sitting here thinking about, well, what is our sort of public outreach or involvement process for a particular issue? You know, it may be, you know, a very routine thing, or we answer those questions and say, hey, we really don't need to do anything more than have a planning commission work session and a hearing. So it gives us those steps that we ought to be thinking about as we go through there. How we apply them really depends on the issue that we're dealing with and what we think the significance is for the community.
Rick, did you have a comment earlier?
Yeah, I think, Jeff, you're doing a beautiful job of explaining some things, better probably than I could have. What it all boils down to is that, you know, we're probably talking about kind of a two-tier engagement process. The first one is to go, I think we have a problem here. And then, you know, that is something that, for instance, in the zoning, that came out that we have a problem with trying to have, if we're gonna have this population increase, how are we gonna fit them in? What are we gonna do with it? And you can see, I mean, I've gone to a lot of these meetings and there's nobody here. And, you know, for the last few months, there's been a lot of people, there's a lot of public support for having a voice here. And so the defining of the problem really goes back to figuring out, going, well, we have a problem here, and if it's big enough, then it goes to subcommittee, and one of you, you know, Jeff or Mike or David says, okay, I'll take this on and try to reach out to the community for the stakeholders or whatever it is, and begin that subcommittee and bring this problem back after that subcommittee has come to its conclusions. And I know that sounds like a lot more work, but it actually spreads the work out into the public more. And then you come back and you have a more full discussion with more people in the community. And from then you'll move on into the next process, into the engagement process. But I think you've kind of vetted it a bit by going through that process when you're dealing with something. The other thing to consider is that there is attention fatigue. There's only so much you guys can do, and there's only so much the public's going to do before we're going to burn out here. So, you know, it does have to be something significant to be able to reach a certain level. And, you know, how do you figure out, well, where is that level? You know, and it's going to change with one issue to another. So it's not going to be an easy decision to make of, well, when do we do this engagement process and when do we not do it? So, you know, and the last thing I'll say is that I would like to see some sort of vote coming back that 100% of the planning commission thinks this is a good idea and wants to put this forward. Because when this comes through, go through with the planning, with the zoning, we'll come up with the ideas. It would really be able to put it in front of the city council is that full support of the planning department.
Thank you. So are we going to get into the zoning issue tonight and defining? Was that what I heard you say?
I hope not.
I didn't structure anything specific for that.
I heard you say that. I was like, are we really going to do that
Yeah,
tonight?
so
Okay.
to the extent that it helps apply what you're thinking, yes. I don't have any decision points prepared for you to help you process how to get from point A, unknown point A to unknown point B. So it's all yours. And that's taking a step back a little bit too. Part of the issues that were identified through this work group is that a lot of the responsibilities fall to me, and they a lot of the blame, a lot of the everything else falls to me.
Right.
And so with all of this, kind of taking a step back and asking you all to take a step forward and fill that void. And so where do you want to go with all of this?
Well, what I like, just one second, Mary, what I like again most about this is, you know, you have this entire list, and I would hope that it would always stay with the file, because a lot of times there'll be decisions, and then people will come back and there's complaints. And then with that, where like, hey, we had this entire process, we're able to show it. Look, it's about having to go back in the record and try to figure out what was said by whom. So, I mean, I'm very much in support of all of this entire framework.
No, I think ultimately defining or deciding what the issue is that we're dealing with is the planning commission's responsibility. But I think the work group, as in just a discrete step, not to go any further, you could ask that work group to come back and say, hey, here's what we think the issues are. The planning commission can add to that, they can pare it back to something they think is more appropriate. But have that work group come in and say, hey, these are the issues that we see, because we know there's just a variety of interests out there that we heard just in the work group. You know, the quality of life, you know, what does it mean for infrastructure? How is this really going to affect affordable housing? I mean, there's just a lot there that I think that perhaps the work group could sit down and say, here's what we think those issues are, and then bring that back here. And I think the planning commission needs to feel comfortable that, okay, that's the package that we really want to engage the public on.
Mary?
Yeah, you have a problem with the zoning issue. That's why this group came together. So you already know what you're going to do. So why not let them go answer your biggest question? Why are we doing this? Then also ask them to perhaps find out the capacity that you have to figure out the problem. And then this is a living process and it's a living document. So you can do no wrong here. But you do have to move forward. You can't keep talking about it. It's after 7. You know, it's like they made a good presentation and it's become very apparent that this is a big issue. And you already have the problem. You don't need to go looking for another one. So, you know, whatever you choose to do with it, let them fly with it and at your next meeting give you a report and then you can see how this process is going. I think it was very well thought out from them. But again, it's a living process. It's not zero tolerance. Everything is on the table. And I think, you know, it needs to move along for you. That way you'll be accomplishing stuff. But give them the tough questions and they're already interested. You've already got them on the hook. So why not use them?
Well, I think we're taking so much time thinking about this, Mary, because the idea would be that this framework could then be used for many other issues going forward. I mean, that's why I'm spending so much time. No, I understand that. Yeah, I hear you.
I think Mary brings up a good point, though, in that in terms of the timeliness and the time-sensitive nature of this, and that the city has to keep business moving on. So one thing I think that we should strive for as planning commission moving forward is when we go through this process is to not to attempt to keep the process streamlined enough in terms of time so that we don't bog down multiple issues and 6-month subcommittees to report back to the planning commission. I see a subcommittee's role as a work group role as being involved throughout the process, but in terms of the early steps, you know, would a month be enough time? 2 months? We had 3 meetings in a little over a month, maybe not even a month and a half, maybe a month and a half, to talk about this issue. So I think some type of general time frame should be thought about when we ask a subcommittee to report back to the planning commission. And on this issue, I think that, and what I've thought is that it isn't zoning, it's increasing residential housing capacity. It's not just talking about zoning, it's the role that the planning commission has in increasing residential housing capacity. But what I would like to recommend, number one, I would like to thank Tracy, Rick, and Pat for delivering this presentation to us tonight about the public engagement process. And Brian, thank you, Brian, as well. If Brian is attending virtually. I would make a general recommendation that we would adopt this public engagement process as presented to us. And also make a recommendation that we convene a subcommittee on increasing residential housing capacity to have a report back to the planning commission at no later than September meeting. I don't know if that's the appropriate time frame on this, but.
Is that a motion?
I'm just seeing, there's a prelude to a motion, I guess.
I'm not even sure if we really need a motion. I mean, we just-
So one of the things that this subcommittee struggled with and was able to establish on their own is their charge. What were they charged with doing? And so that made the meetings more difficult because there was an agreement and they had to develop their own consensus on what they were doing. And so I'm not suggesting that you give them something specific to report back on, but consider whether or not that would be helpful or exactly what you're hoping to get from them.
One of the first things I would request of the subcommittee would be to take a look at the public engagement that has been already instituted for this project or for this consideration for the planning commission. To have them report back to us to summarize the issues. I think you've already done that maybe in bits and pieces in some of the staff reports, but it's nice to have the subcommittee to take a look at it and say, well, compile what has already been done. Would be one of the things that our subcommittee. But then I think another question that would be before the subcommittee would be, how does the city of Stevenson increase, what are ways that the city of Stevenson can increase residential housing capacity?
And I think in addition to just talking about zoning, which is what we do as a planning commission, we raise those other questions that we can't answer, that really says these need to be answered as well. You know, and we're talking about the infrastructure. And I think we're also talking about, you know, what are some of the quality of life issues? You know, why do people like it here? And just identifying that.
So are we asking them though to define the problem as well? Is that what you're suggesting?
I think so. I think what we're asking them to do is to give us sort of a definition or at least a scope of what that problem is, to allow the planning commission to say, okay, do we feel comfortable that that is really the problem that we want to try and address as a planning commission, or how do we go about doing that? What can we do as a planning commission? What would we need city council and staff support maybe in some of those other issues? But yeah, to answer those questions, I think are going to be key.
Yeah. And for me, Valerie, I think the question's already pretty clearly answered in my mind as to why the planning commission had just been brought before us. But in terms of what we heard from the public, what Jeff has brought up is that the why is something that really needs to be better defined on this issue.
So we're really you're asking the group to go back and basically work on define issue. Pretty much.
Is that appropriate?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, I'm looking at that as a specific.
Let's say that's our next task. If we get through that task, then we move on to subsequent tasks, I think.
What was that?
Rush rig and new center.
Let me look. Hold on. Stand by. We might just be doing. They're just doing training. All right. I like that idea. Davey, what? Feel comfortable with that process? For the specific issue, and also though keeping this, working on this framework, as Mary said, is a living document. I really like this. Do we do like a motion? Would that make you feel more comfortable? Or are you okay with us all just raising our hands that we're good with
Well, as long as you all have a common,
finding?
all have common expectations. That's how you do things for a motion and say, yeah, we all agree.
But I don't know that, but a lot of times they're not necessary. So what I'm gonna say is, the working group is going to go back and work on the defining the issue for that. Is that?
For zoning, yeah. And I think that's just a task we can send to the work group. I go back to the framework, and it would be nice to say, yeah, we're okay with this sort of public involvement decision framework. In other words, how we would approach making those decisions. if you're comfortable with that, to simply say, yeah, we're gonna take that, that's gonna be part of our policy base as a planning commission. Is that, would that be appropriate then?
So,
Tracy, want to comment?
Yeah, Tracy Grotto, again, I was just gonna support, it would be nice to be able to say to the city council that this commission has adopted, or some formalized decision has been made around it. I think it would give it a little more oomph, and our efforts would seem a little more validated. Just a thought.
Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna go back to issue number 1, which is the zoning / housing issue, whatever name. We have 2 different topics, titles, it's the same thing. Okay. So the working group is going to go ahead and come back in September, working specifically on things that have already been done as far as public outreach and work. And then just working on that section, the entire section here, right in the flow plan, defining the issue. So if everyone is good with that, please raise your hand. Mike, Jeff, Davey, and Val. Did you get that, Johanna? We all had our hands up. Okay. Now, moving on to actually adopting this as a policy, this framework.
I've
We
got,
should make a formal recommend, or a.
Okay.
so one thing that I think would be helpful, I'm trying to process how to keep it living while doing this, is requesting that the last 2 attachments, the flow charts and the engagement methods be somehow incorporated into your bylaws.
Okay.
And so I try to work with Tracy if she's still available to massage it into something that could be put in there that can be referred to for each project and institutionalize these expectations that the community has spent a lot of time telling us that we should have.
So is that a motion we make tonight, or do you do that and bring it back to us?
I say it's a draft right now.
For the bylaws, changes to the bylaws, you can adopt it at the meeting after the change has been fully submitted in writing. And so it'd be 2 meetings out before you can adopt any change, but we're rolling toward.
Okay.
And I think you're going to change that public or PD to PI.
Right.
Yeah.
Right,
There's a
that's
few
why we-
draft
that's why
changes,
we
yeah.
didn't adopt it tonight.
Right.
We gotta clean it up.
Now, why are we not also including this kind of workflow plan? You're excluding that from these 2.
No good reason. No good reason. All of them can be, yeah.
Just allow you to work through that then and put it in a form where it makes sense in terms of a policy statement or bylaws.
Right.
I think I would feel comfortable with that.
Yep. Mike?
I'm okay with that too. I think that makes the most sense. Let's say that we've adopted in theory, but we'll formally adopt it once we get it, then we can adopt it into the bylaw.
That's not draft 1.
And sort of our intent is to
Right.
do this.
To adopt it.
I concur. I think it's a fine document, but I agree there might be a couple of tweaks.
Yeah. Gotta clean up, yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for all your work. Appreciate it.
With,
I know we got to move along. Mary's getting antsy.
give me some more bunkers here. So Tracy's been pretty clear that she's not interested in zoning. And so expecting her to be on that subcommittee, they make sure that she's off the hook for that, but I'll keep her on the hook for at least cleaning up these documents. Mary is at these meetings, and Mary would represent the type of stakeholder that we excluded in our first round, where we just sent notices to property owners. And so someone like Mary or Mary herself would want to be on that and do that.
Mary, we'd really appreciate your input, honestly, if you had time.
Or if you know of anybody that might be interested.
You know, I'm sure there are a lot of interested parties, people, and I hope to live back in Stevenson one of these days. And that, but I'm thinking of the broader picture. Stevenson is the keystone here for all the other communities. So, you know, what you all do here impacts other things too. You have the most infrastructure. You probably will be the last one standing with water, considering how our water issues are going. So you know, I'll be glad to have as much input as I can from what I know.
Okay, thanks, Mary. So I assume Michael's stay on, Jeff, Rick will stay on, all right.
You have other people in the committee.
Maybe an invitation could go out and people could self-select. I'm happy to be a reactor. I just
Okay.
can't get into yeah.
Okay. So you kind of participate, okay. That sounds good.
She
All right,
said we could do the R3 in her neighborhood, so that we already got that
Okay.
figured out.
sounds good. So Jeff, would you, who's going to do the,
I'm comfortable with, yeah.
doing the reaching out to folks?
Thanks,
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, I think I'll
I'm
say.
not quite sure what I volunteered for, but I'll work with them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Well,
And so the reason why I asked things like Mary, so we will send the invitation out to that existing subcommittee or the subcommittee that's closing. Mary, if she's willing to, are there other stakeholders that we have not identified? So many of these self-selected, we just voluntold Mary. Are there others to reach out to? Or is that good enough?
I wonder if we could get somebody from the Downtown Stevenson Association or a business group member, Chamber of Commerce, somebody that might want to represent the corporate or the business interests of
Sure.
people.
I'll reach out to UCC first as the proponents of the first setting.
And we definitely want to get that planning commission member.
Well, that's not a bad
City
idea.
council, yeah, I'm sorry.
city council member, yeah. Yeah. All right. And Brian, have you done doing? All right. All right, we're gonna move along. Moving right along. Zoning amendment.
That is relic. I don't know why that's there. That's a relic from the last,
Which one, the
Last
trade
meeting.
districts code update? Thank you, Tracy.
Okay, so there's a placeholder memo that's a relic that was a copy. and
Okay.
paste error from last year.
All
The
right.
trade districts is real, it just has the
Okay.
wrong title.
Okay.
And that's part of the updates. That's not something I'm asking you to weigh in on.
Okay.
So
Got it.
you've already covered 5 and 6, I think, of the agenda. And so we're in the
Oh, we
bottom of
did?
the month. Yeah.
Oh, really? Wow.
No, it's easy.
All right. What? Very. It's only 7:27 and I'm already to thought of the month. Seriously?
Did you have anything that you wanted to bring forward?
Well, the thought of the
Good night.
month, I think it's the donut theory. This one, Ben said, just to read, I think I've already told you this, we will try to get a speaker from the Portland City Administration. They're actually implementing the donut theory in Portland. And so I'd like him to speak to it. I don't know if you all had a chance to see the TED Talk. I think the TED Talk is a lot easier than the book. Trust me on that.
Okay.
The theory is,
Donut theory?
yeah, the theory is written by Kate Raworth, and she's an economist, and my eyes glazed over. Yours might not. Who knows?
Okay.
But the TED Talk is interesting, and so when we have him, this will be part of our community resiliency programs from the Grange. It'll be through the library, probably a Zoom meeting. So Ben tried to get me to define donut theory, and the basic thing is that you live within your means, and that we're all here, and our ecosystem surrounds us, and this can't get bigger than the ecosystem. That's my basic understanding. That means you live within your means, and actually kind of a little bit even, like harder within your means. Resources are so tricky, these days. That's what this theory, but how you implement it in a community. So when we do have the talk, I will invite all the board planning departments to listen in and see, because I don't think that this can be applied to small cities as well as large cities. And in a smaller city, it might even be easier because you can see everything. In a larger city, your population is so diverse, there's so many pockets of this and that going on that you lose sight of what impacts are really going on in your bigger community. So that's my spiel on the donut theory.
Thank you. Well,
Staffing committee reports. So we reported last time that we no longer had an agreement with an intern from UW. I'm happy to report now that we do have another one that's ready to come in. So we've lost some time in that process, and so we'll try to make sure that he has a manageable project that produces something that we can use. But happy to be moving forward on that. Again, that will be further assessing downtown parking. I don't have it on here, but we did just issue an RFQ for consultants to do the next phase of our realignment of Columbia. And so this is a brownfields funded grant through Department of Ecology that the purpose of the grant fund is to bring back into productive use brownfield properties, contaminated or potentially contaminated properties, bringing them back into public use. And it's a really nice program in that it is looking at the property itself and the economics of the property itself and developing projects that will work within the reality, the economics of the project. So that will get going in the last half of this year, and I think it's an exciting one to move the concepts of that draft downtown plan forward as we keep planning. So that's cool. The memo that's mistiled there is about utility service outside city limits. So this is something that the city council is taking points on.
Okay.
We currently prohibit new connections to public water outside of city limits unless your home existed prior to 1980 and that there's an existing water line outside of city limits adjacent to the home, and that you petitioned for annexation and were denied.
wow.
Okay. So, reconsidering that, the city council generally has three types of approaches that they could take. One would be to keep the status quo. One would be to allow new connections to existing lines. So we're not extending the system at all. We're infilling on that system. And one would be to allow extensions and new connections. And so there's draft changes to those policies that currently prohibit water right now. And that's very drafty. It only applies to water. There's no prohibition of extending sewer outside city limits. It's never been an issue. It likely would continue to not be an issue, but this draft only applies to water. If they move forward, it would make more sense to expand this to be water and sewer or any other utility service.
So what's pushing, what is it that's the impetus for this?
This was also funded by that Department of Commerce grant about increasing residential building capacity.
Okay.
And so the question here is, can building capacity increase by just allowing new connections? And is that something that the city's ready to do? So.
Boy, I think that's just a loaded question in many ways. Well, take for example, you look at our water system and our sewer system in terms of how it's developed, and you try to look at the logic in terms of how we've done that, and you end up scratching your head. And my concern is if you allow those extensions without really thinking about what is an effective delivery system for those utilities, you could be opening yourself for some real increased costs in the future. I think this is a slippery slope, quite frankly.
And a lot of dug up road.
That's a good point, and not to belabor the topic, but since we have a few minutes, it seems like we do. Yeah, one of the issues with water mains is that a circular connection requires a less of a large of a main to service the same volume of houses and flow than if it's a one direction non-loop system. For some reason, the physics work out that if you've got a one-way pipe, it needs to be larger to serve the same, keep the same volume for the same number of houses than if it was a circular loop that circulates the water. So yeah, the piecemeal approach to that is probably not the wisest way for the city to go about it.
Well, it's just when you're thinking about where you're going to allow extensions, you ought to think about what that really implies to the effectiveness and the future costs of that system.
But that won't be before us, though, that's some of the council.
If they choose to send it to you guys for a recommendation, which I expect that they probably would, but they'll be determining a public involvement strategy. They'll be using you as a subcommittee recommendation if they use you.
Does this have a tendency or potential to sort of confuse some of the conversations we're having with zoning? I mean, have these on separate maps come together? I mean,
It absolutely does.
just
No, it's going to inform the subgroups discussion, actually. So that's going to be one of their things, is
Yes.
what are your limitations?
Yeah.
I want to invite you all to the garden, the Stevenson Community Garden. They're at the west end of the fairgrounds, and they're really going in great guns. The tomatoes are ripening. But we have 2 plots from which we grow food for the lunch program, seniors lunch program, and we did receive money from the city to beautify the gardens this year, and we're going to paint the shed and everything else. But they're a really interesting interpretive part. We get a lot of tourists down there, and this might be something to think about when you're thinking about the city and green spaces. People really enjoy green spaces, and we invite people into the garden, we give them a tour, we give them free seeds and free beans and other things as they come up, and that's really important to people, to their psyche, that the green.
It is.
Mary, one thing you may want to think about, I was involved with the startup of the Longview school garden program. And it's really grown now. It's tremendous.
No pun intended.
Well, we actually were, thank you for mentioning that. We had three plots for the first and second graders from the elementary school for 3 years. That's where they started. And then what they did was the parents of that elementary school got involved, and they have built their own apparently. The high school is not as successful, but the little kids, they
I've
walk
seen it.
down once or twice a week, and they would come, and their handprints are still, they did painting, and their handprints are still on the rocks and things, but they had such joy in working with, their teachers would walk them down, and it was just fun to have them down there. We do miss them.
And
Thank you.
That's where it
then you have an
started.
understanding where the food is coming
That's
from.
that
Yes,
too.
exactly. Yeah, hopefully the elementary school is doing their thing up there. But yeah, they started in the Stevenson Community Gardens. Okay,
All right.
let's enjoy.
Bye-bye. We're adjourned.
Take care, be safe.
Thank you, Johanna. I need to put a little note in front of me that says, say your name.
Yeah.
I get kind of engaged and I forget. And I don't know if she can hear me because I tried to say the person's name first. Maybe she's not hearing me. Say it a little bit louder.
She's still here. Joanna, is there any way we could improve the?
Did you not hear me? I tried to say their name first.
No, I heard you. I did.
Okay.
I heard you. It's hard because it's blurry. I can't really make out who it is in the audience. I kind of know their voice, but I don't always, and I don't want to make assumptions. And tonight
Right.
was really muffled. It was really hard to hear people. So I did my best, and I think I got most of it. But I will need the recording just so I can verify what I
Okay,
did right
thank you.
now.
Okay.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, guys. You're doing great work.
Thanks, John.
All right. And we're having a meeting in August too, right? Sometimes we take off in the summer.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
we're having a meeting here. Yes, we're taking
Well,
August
you guys aren't
off.
bringing anything back till September.
That's right.
Hey, I was thinking of taking some time off.
Yeah, really.
Anything coming up?
Not that
If we could just have a report from the intern or the
Yeah,
progress. of the
exactly.
plan.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.